Hello there, it's your friend Phil, project management trainer and coach. Today we're going to be talking about the 47 processes of the PMBOK Guide 5th edition. Now this is a topic that will help you as you study for the PMP exam or just to understand what exactly is in the PMBOK Guide. Now on page 61 in the PMBOK Guide, you've got that table that breaks down the processes into process groups and knowledge areas. Most people typically cover this from left to right, but we're going to be covering it from top down in columns. And then we're going to be moving all the way from initiating to closing. So let's start with initiating. In initiating, the first thing that happens is the development of a project charter that authorizes the project manager, that identifies the PM, and is authorized by a project initiator or sponsor. It's a document that authorizes the project. The next process in initiating is identify stakeholders. In the identify stakeholders process, the project manager carries out a stakeholder analysis to better understand the stakeholders, better understand their level of influence, their level of impact, to understand those that have a high level of power and a low level of power, those that have a high influence level or a low influence level, and those that have a high interest level and a low interest level. And this is where the PM begins to identify these stakeholders and their needs. The next process group is the planning process group. In the planning process group, this is a very important one. This is where the big master plan for the project is developed. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's why one of the first things we want to do in this process group is we want to develop a roadmap, a plan for how the entire project will be managed. And one of the things that happens a lot on projects is changes. So right off the bat, while this is still in infancy, we want to define how changes will be made to widgets, to plans, to documents, to various aspects of the project, to drawings. So the first thing we do is come up with a skeletal, as it were, project management plan, and this gives us guidance in a uniform way how to manage changes to project artifacts, to project documents, to project drawings, and so on. But this is not a one-time event. This is an iterative thing we incrementally are going to add to the project management plan through this process. We're going to incrementally add a scope management plan and incrementally add a scope baseline and incrementally add a schedule management plan. And you're going to see all of these processes come to life as we move along. So the next thing to think about here is the plan scope management process. In this process, our major goal is to define how we are going to manage scope, how we're going to define scope to start with. So it's a plan that gives us guidance on how to do many things. Also from this process, we have a requirements management plan as an output. And that leads us to the next process of collect requirements. We want to collect all the requirements, business requirements, technical requirements, functional requirements, and so on, to get a good understanding of what exactly the customer wants. And once we understand what the customer wants, we need to define the parameters of the project. We then have a better idea of what is in the project and what is not in the project, what by default, because of the requirements, needs to be done to get to that end game, that end state that we're looking for. We call that defined scope. So we want to define inclusions, exclusions, constraints, and assumptions, and we put this into a document called the project scope statement. The next process is create WBS. Now, if you haven't seen a WBS, it looks like a family tree, but it shows how the project scope is decomposed into lower levels of detail. Google the term WBS to get a better idea of this. Now, the next thing that happens in planning is plan schedule management. This is where we put a plan together for how to manage time on the project, for how to define the activities, sequence them, and so on. And you're going to be seeing a lot of these other time management processes as we go along. But you see, I've got this in blue because every knowledge area has a plan, and it's in the blue text processes that we put these plans together. So plan schedule management guides us on how to create that schedule. A lot of times people just go into MS Project and they begin to create a schedule, but in the world of the PMI, we need to be intentional about the how. How are we going to get the activities defined? How are we going to sequence them? Which relationships will we use? Which tolerances do we need to be aware of, and so on. The next process here is define activities. This is where you create an activity list. It does not have to be in order. We take our WBS work packages and we break them open from the larger buckets of about, let's say, 80 to 320 hours. On smaller projects, maybe even 8 hours. But we want to take those buckets of work packages and we want to break them down into smaller pieces, maybe activities of 1 hour, half an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and so on. And that's define activities. Now, this doesn't have to be in order. It's in the next process that we put it in order. The next process is called sequence activities, and this is where we employ start-to-start relationships or finish-to-finish relationships, or finish-to-start relationships, or even start-to-finish relationships to join those activities. Every predecessor should be linked to a successor, except it's at the end of a project. And we want to make sure that the very beginning of the project is indeed the beginning of the project, with the right relationships, the right dependencies, and so on. The next process here is estimate activity resources. What kind of effort are you thinking about? Yes, it will take you 50 hours of work. How many people do you think you need to do that? What skill level are you looking for to be able to do that within that effort or that period? And that takes us to the next process, which is called estimate activity durations, because based on the resources and based on the parameters, you then are able to estimate how long it will take you to work those 50 hours. Are we talking about 50 hours worked in a work week by 2 people or 1 person? Or are we talking about 50 hours that needs to be spanned across months because of the nature of tests being done, because we need to wait for certain lab results to come back and so on? So it really depends on the project. The next process here, as exemplified by the lady at the desk on MS Project or Primavera, she's putting together a schedule. We call this develop schedule. This is where you get all of the information that you've assembled so far, from define activities all the way down to estimate activity durations, and you put that together into a schedule that has a start date and an end date for all of the activities and the project as a whole. The next process is plan cost management. Now, this doesn't happen in strict rotation in a linear fashion. You could already have thought about your budget earlier on, much earlier on, even when you were still in the bidding cycle of things. But in plan cost management, this is where you plan how to estimate and budget. Now, in plan cost management, we could also think about tolerances, plus 5%, minus 5%, and what have you. We could also think about the estimating approaches to estimate the activities. Now, the next process, estimate cost, is governed by the cost management plan and output from the process we just talked about. Now, we estimate how much each activity will cost, and then in the next process, we roll this up into a final amount called the budget. So in determine budget, we are determining the entire budget for the project. Something else to think about as you plan is quality. So in plan quality management, this is where we identify the quality standards that need to be adhered to on the project, and the output of that is a quality management plan. Also, we get another output called the process improvement plan to improve on the processes and to guide us in quality assurance. But more on that later when we get to executing. The next process is plan human resource management. You can see another blue text process. This is where you put together a human resource management plan that guides the project manager and the team for how to acquire the team, acquire the wider team, develop the team, and manage the team. So it's a plan for how to do those things. The next process is plan communications management. This is where the project manager thinks about what to communicate, why, how, when, and to whom. The next process is plan risk management. This is where the project manager needs to plan for uncertainty that could impact the project. How are we going to manage uncertainty that could impact the project? So the how is documented in a risk management plan, and then we execute that plan by identifying risks. Our next process. In identify risks, you want to identify those negative risks or threats, and you also want to identify positive risks or opportunities that may be available. You identify these risks, and then you go to the next process where you qualitatively analyze risks. In qualitative risk analysis, your main aim is to rank the risks from top to bottom, and ranking could be quite subjective. You could rank the risks in terms of how probable you think they could be, or you could rank them in terms of how impactful, or you could hybridize that by multiplying on a scale of 1 to 5, what's the probability? It's a 3. On a scale of 1 to 5, what's the impact? It's a 4. 3 times 4 is 12. You get a risk score, and then you do that for all the risks to rapidly rank them. But then again, you need to think about risk urgency. What do we really need to take care of today? If we don't take care of it today, it could grow and become worse. So there are many perspectives to think about qualitative risk analysis. But the next process here is perform quantitative risk analysis. In this process, this is where the project manager and the team should quantitatively analyze the risks from a dollar perspective, or from a resource hour perspective, or some other quantitative measure. Typically, it's probability in terms of a best guess, or in terms of expert judgment, if you wanted to call it that, times the impact that you foresee would occur in terms of dollars. And then you come up with what we call the risk magnitude, or the expected monetary value. The next process here is to plan the response for these risks that you've identified. Also, you need to think about procurement management. Do we need to procure any services or goods from an external firm? This is where you plan how to do it, the contract types involved, and how you would carry out the entire procurement or contracting process. And last but not least, in planning, we have plan stakeholder management. This is where you plan how to keep your stakeholders, who you have already identified, engaged. You might decide to have certain meetings or certain face-to-face engagement with these stakeholders. Now, moving on to our next process group, it's the executing process group. Now, this is where we take all of the plans that we have just created and we put those plans into action. But bear in mind that all of those plans are going to funnel back into one place called the project management plan. So this is really where we begin to carry out those different components that we've identified. First process here is called direct and manage project work, and in this process we integrate all of the aspects of the project that pertain to executing the work. This is where theoretically your deliverable comes from, and theoretically this is where work performance data is gleaned. Your work performance data is an output of this process. Your work performance data are your raw observations about the project. But raw observations are no good. They need to be analyzed. However, it's important to glean the data, and it's important to create those deliverables. So direct and manage project work is a rather important one. The next process here is perform quality assurance. This is where the project manager and the team should be checking the process, checking the work procedures to make sure the work is being carried out the right way. The next process is acquire project team, which speaks for itself. This is where the PM is engaged in acquiring the project team from functional managers or external to the project. The next process is develop project team. This is where the project team gets trained and coached and mentored and developed. We talk about team building, we talk about off-site seminars and so on. But the key goal is to equip the team with the skills that they need. This is where we try to get the team to synergize and work together to deliver the final product of the project. The next process is manage project team. Think about feedback, think about assessments and analyzing those assessments to really make sure that the team has gleaned something tangible from the development process. And if not, if you've sent Phil for training and Phil learned nothing and he's not performing well, this is where you have a rethink of sending him to more training or doing something different. The next process here is managed communications. This is where you are actively communicating with stakeholders on the project through meetings and so on. The next process here is conduct procurements. And in conduct procurements, your main goal is to carry out that bidding process by having bidder conferences, by reviewing the proposals that were sent in, and ultimately selecting a seller. Last but not least, in executing, we have managed stakeholder engagement. This is where the project manager and the team are actively involved in executing the plan to keep stakeholders engaged. This is where you're having those face-to-face interactions and making sure that the stakeholder is aware of what he or she needs to be aware of. Now going to the next process group, it's the monitoring and controlling process group. First process here is called monitor and control project work. It's an integrative process where you make sure you are integrating all the moving parts to ensure that the project as a whole is well monitored and controlled. The next process here is another integrative one known as perform integrated change control. This is where you would review all of those change requests with a group of people known as the change control board. The change control board review change requests and they call the shots on if the change should be approved, rejected, or put on pending status. And ultimately, you get a change log from this process that documents everything. Now, the next process is validate scope. In validate scope, the customer reviews the deliverable that the performing organization have provided. Now, the performing organization have a responsibility to ensure that any deliverable that's being viewed or inspected by the customer is indeed good to go. So this is where the customer would validate that indeed the entire scope, the requirements, what was needed is indeed inherent in the deliverable. The next process is known as control scope. Control scope is where the project manager ensures that no one is adding extras, no one is gold plating, and that there's no scope creep. And if there is, if someone's trying to add extras, those extras or those requests must be funneled through the perform integrated change control process that we've just talked about. The next process here is control schedule, making sure that the team is on schedule, making sure there are no delays and there are no changes, and if there are changes, they must be passed through the right process. The next process here is control cost. Again, the PM is controlling those cost expenditures to make sure that they are being spent on what exactly was identified, no more, no less. So there are many avenues for the PM to catch gold plating and to catch the project from going off track. The next process here is control quality. Again, the PM and the team should ensure that that deliverable that is produced is fit for use and conforms to requirements through inspection. So in control quality, the project manager must aspire to check every way possible that that deliverable is good to go to the customer. And we talked about validate scope as in where the customer checks the deliverable for themselves. The next process is control communications. This is where the project manager and the team are involved in controlling communications to ensure that the communications management plan is effective. And if not, there must be changes. So we need to control our communications if it is going off track. The next process is control risks. This is where the project manager and the team are actively involved in checking to make sure that the risk response was relevant, to make sure that the reserves on the project are adequate, and to make sure that if there's anything that could be done better risk-wise, it should be done, and also to ensure that risks are at their initial state, and if they've changed, there must be updates. And also, very importantly, to make sure that the risk status, as in All the risks identified are the only risks that the project is exposed to. And if there are new risks, those new risks must be documented within this process of control risks. So there's quite a lot that happens in that one. The next one is control procurements. In control procurements, the project manager and the team should be ensuring that the vendor or the contractor or subcontractor, whatever you call them, are making sure that they're doing the right thing. You want to get reports from these folks and make sure that what they are doing is exactly what they said. And if not, you must make sure that you steer the project in the right way. Last but not least in this process group is control stakeholder engagement. And in control stakeholder engagement, again, the PM should be monitoring what's going on. And if the stakeholder is not engaged, meaning the stakeholder management plan is not working in this process, the PM should make sure that that plan is updated or modified accordingly to get the stakeholder engaged. Now, the final process group is the closing process group. Remember, by now, the customer has already checked the deliverable. The customer has approved the deliverable by the time you get here. And remember, it happens in iterations. There could be several phases that employ these 5 process groups. Phase by phase. You could have the design phase go through the 5 process groups. You could have the development phase go through the 5 process groups. The implementation phase go through the 5 process groups. The training and development, or the training and education of the team, also go through the 5 process groups. And ultimately, you transition your deliverable. And that is the end of the project. But these 5 process groups, bear in mind, they could be applied in different ways on different projects. So in closing, we know the customer has accepted the deliverable. By the time you get here, one of the big things is close project or phase. You could close out a phase within a project, or you could close out the project as a whole. Now, if you're closing out a phase, do your lessons learned. Make sure you don't carry bad habits to the next phase. If you're closing out a project, gather all the lessons learned, document all the lessons learned, and make sure you don't release the team until they have given you all the artifacts and all those other little things, non-tangibles in some instances, that you identified up front as being some of the project closure requirements. And the other thing you could do in closing is close procurements. You could close out 1 procurement on a project, 10, 20, depending on how many you have. So you would typically close out procurements, and then you would close out a phase, and then you would close out the project as a whole. And those are your 47 processes. Remember, if you are on a mission to get PMP certified, don't wait another second. Visit Praizion.com. Come on board our online self-study course, which comes with phenomenal mentoring, coaching, training, and equipping. We will kick you into shape to make sure you're ready to face that beast, that PMP exam, that CAPM exam. We will get you in shape. Now, if you're thinking of training your team, we offer these training sessions live on site. We've done this for so many different firms, the U.S. Army, the FBI, the Army Corps of Engineers, and many more. So if you're looking for a great organization to kick you into shape, to boot you, to equip you, to make sure that when you face that $555 exam, you are putting your best foot forward and you're not squandering your firm's money, or if you work for the government, you're not squandering taxpayer money. Hey, we want to make sure we use those dollars well, don't we? I hope you enjoyed this. Look forward to speaking to you in person, online, one of our classes, wherever. But whatever the case, all the best in your project management journey.
Let me ask you something. What does your boss say about you? What does your firm have planned for your career? What do your friends say about you? What do people think of you? What do you think of yourself? What do you have planned for your career? We see in you a champion, someone with the potential to succeed in whatever you do as you put your mind to it. We see in you someone with an aptitude to understand and conquer the heights and depth of seemingly difficult subject matter. We see in you a champion who is able to conquer posed difficulties, someone who is able to achieve goals and dreams despite all odds. We see in you the ability to succeed in your quest to learn leadership lessons, communication best practices, and stakeholder management. We see in you the potential to conquer the iron triangle and the quintuple constraint. We see in you the potential to achieve professional success, to pass professional exams with ease. We see in you the potential to fulfill your destiny in adding value to your loved ones, peers, company, and those around you. We are Praizion, and we know that you can achieve your goals if you believe you can. Come with us. Praizion.com